Hello, we're back again. We're studying English Catholic history, especially as it centers around the Reformation. So, last time we did talk about the Reformation and how Elizabeth I was the worst of the persecutors of the Catholic Church. Any priest caught was not only arrested, but he was hanged, drawn, and quartered as a warning because she was trying to kill the Catholic Church. And the issue for me is her sister, who is Mary Stuart. There are two Marys, and that's confusing. There's Mary Stuart and Mary Queen of Scots, two different people. But anyway, Mary uh, was a Catholic, and that was an issue there as well. But okay, so I want to step back because I missed some important things included involved in the church, and I'd like to mention them. And that was the Norman Conquest came about. It was brought about by a Viking from Normandy, and he had the Viking blood. He was a vicious battler, and very successful. His name was William the Bastard, and I just love saying that because but he conquered England, and he did that specifically so they stopped calling him William the Bastard and start calling him William the Conqueror. So, uh, but his son was named Henry, and Henry really was a bastard because he did things like to fight for his crown, so that because he was not first in line to be king. He he battled his brother and threw him in prison and left him there for the brother's entire life. Pretty heartless guy. And he had a son by the name of William. So Henry is the son of William the Conqueror, and then he had his name was Henry, and then his son was named William, named after his grandfather. Okay, that's the trouble with studying English history. All the kings have the same names. And then when they're in one place, they're the fourth, and then they move on to be the king of England, and then all of a sudden they become Henry the Eighth or something. And so it's very confusing. I would hate to be a schoolboy in England learning history because the royal names are like Richard, Henry, William, and so forth. Charles was a big royal name. George later on. And so they all have the same names, just different numbers. So it's very confusing. Anyway, he had a favorite son, William, and he was the only heir in that line. Then what they call the Normans, the Normans line, and his son was killed in a disaster. It's called the White Ship sinking. His son was drowned, and that ended the dynasty. That dynasty. The Normans were still around. But then the Normans were terrible Christians and horrible people in a lot of ways, but they were good churchmen. They built beautiful churches. They funded immense monasteries and funded the Cistercians and the Benedictines and all these different orders to a large extent, which in a way, it reinforced the social network of help to the poor and so forth. Because the monks did a lot of good charity for the people, and they didn't have social welfare and everything in those days. It was all done through the church. And so the Normans, as far as the churches went, they really supported the church in every way, even though they acted like total pagans themselves. And so they did. So anyway, so he had a daughter, and her name was Matilda. And it's quite a story because Matilda is just, or was her name Melissa? It's an inside joke. Anyway, Matilda was quite a woman. She really was. Henry named her as his heir to succeed him to the throne. But, and a lot of this took place in Normandy, not in England, because that's where they're from. And anyway, but there was a cousin by the name of Stephen, and Stephen claimed that he had been named the heir. So there was this battle with Stephen and between Stephen and Matilda, and the thing is, they were both fighting for the crown. And uh, I wouldn't bring it up so much as she was quite a war. I mean, she wasn't just a woman who sat on her throne and directed her knights to fight her battles. She was the one on the horse with the sword, slashing people's heads off and so forth. So she was she inherited a lot of the Norman characteristics. So she was a fierce battler. And but anyway, she was given in marriage at the age of 9, and that's what was done in those days, to a German relative. They're all related in those days. But he succeeded to the throne as the Holy Roman Emperor. So Matilda became an empress, and she did a pretty good job. She was actually placed in Italy at the time because the Holy Roman Empire included a lot of different places. And she did a very good job. She was a credible leader, courageous and decisive, and she did a great job. The only problem was she had a lousy personality because everybody hated her. She was so arrogant, and so finally she won her battles more or less and headed for London to receive her crown. But she never got it because the people in London boycotted her. She couldn't get into Westminster Abbey. Why? Because they didn't like her, because she was such a stuck-up snob, and so she lost her chance. Finally, it was all settled in a treaty, and the agreement was that she would not get the throne or the crown, but her son would, and her son was Henry II, because his father was not Henry I. That was Matilda's father. Matilda married this German guy whose name was Geoffrey of Flanders, and so, but that was a different line. So I'm making this too complicated, but it's so complicated that Henry II's father was was not the same line, even though Matilda was, and so that was the beginning of a whole different line in England, the Plantagenets. And the Plantagenets, I mean, if the Norsemen or those from the south, if they were bad, the Plantagenets were so bloody that it was so ruthless and crude. But their dynasty lasted for 300 years in England, so nobody dared cross them, I suppose. But anyway, Matilda was known as an empress, but never a queen. She was called the Lady of England. And but the son then, Henry II, is very famous, and I want to bring him up. I'm going to bring the church into all of it in just a minute. But Henry II had a terrible temper, but was a very aggressive warrior. And the nobles were all rose up against him. Now, at that time, he was down in Normandy. But the thing is that he had to. The nobles were going around burning and plundering and killing the people, and in this fights for power. And so he went up there and he really, he cleaned house and scared them all to death, and to the extent that it all stopped. So he was very, very effective as a king and a leader. And but he was the one with his bad temper. He had a chancellor and his name was Thomas Becket. And Thomas Becket was he was a brilliant politician, and he advised Henry II on decisions that he needed to make in terms of his reign. And so they were big buddies. They hunted together, they campaigned together, they drank together, they gambled together, and they chased women together. And so, because in those days, if you were married, that was no obstacle whatsoever. And so they were the best of friends. But the position for the Archbishop of Canterbury became open. The Archbishop died, and Henry said, "Aha! Now I can control everything because I can send Becket down there and make him the Archbishop." He wasn't even a priest, but the king in those days there was a big problem of a battle with Rome because the kings wanted what they call investiture. They thought that they should choose the bishops of their realm. And so Henry thought, well, if I put Becket in there, then he'll do what I tell him, and then I'll have control of the church as well. Well, it didn't happen that way. Becket got religion. They ordained him a priest because he had to be a priest to be the archbishop. And then he got God. And then he began to defy the king. And the king then, that would be Henry II, threw a hissy fit because he did that a lot. He shouted out, screamed it out, "Who will rid me of this pesky priest?" And his guards thought that was an order. So they went down to Canterbury and they just cut his skull in half. Bam, brains all over the place, It was, in those days, they were really vicious, Well, I don't know that Henry intended that to happen, but the next morning when he woke up, he received the news that his men had slaughtered the Archbishop of Canterbury. Oh man, was he in trouble? Because in those days, there was eight people you didn't mess with, and that was the clergy. See, the clergy never were tried civilly. If they committed a crime, they were tried by the church itself. And sometimes they got off real easy. Well, most of the time they got off real easy because they were clergy. And so his popularity was in the basement. But in the meantime, he had married the Empress, the wife of the King of France, and Eleanor of Aquitaine is her name. She was known to be the most beautiful woman in the world. And I've seen pictures of it, I can't see it, but anyway, she's supposed to be beautiful. But she was also a shrewd politician. So the two of them together, Henry II and his wife, really ruled very, very intelligently. But Henry was such a control freak. He wanted to control everything. And his sons wanted to, some power and some rule. He would never give it to them because he never thought that they would be able to do his job the way he could. And so they started turning against him. His wife, Eleanor, the thing is about Eleanor, she left her husband, divorced him, and left the King of France for Henry, who was a brutal man. I guess some women like really broody guys, And so, but anyway, they were not, when she was married to the King of France, they had no children. But as soon as she married Henry, then she had 4 boys in a row. And that the King of France hated Henry because not only did he steal his wife from him, but he also had a lot of children to her as well. So there was no love lost there. So when the boys turned on their father and the wife, they turned to the King of France. And the next thing you know, the Scots were against, and the northern border were trying to dethrone Henry. To the west, they were attacking with all the French and so forth. And so he was really in a bad spot. But smart as he was, what he did is he went to Canterbury and took off his shoes and walked down the road in those days, muddy and filth and so forth, and shards of pottery and glass and so forth, cutting his feet. and then went into the cathedral and down into the basement and uh, asked the monks to beat him. And they beat him mercilessly for hours, and he was just a bloody mess. But he shrewdly knew that the monks couldn't keep a secret if their life was depended upon it. So they told everybody, and it went out into the land that Henry, the King of England, had done severe penances for their sins against Becket, and people began to forgive it. And then miracles started to happen. The Scots turned around and decided not to attack. Those who were on the channel decided not to sail to England. And everybody saw it as he did penance, and then the miracles happened. So he was back and he was cooking on gas again. He was really doing well. And so, but in the meantime, he decided to, because he had bad temper, he went down and attacked his sons and did battle with them and defeated them all. And then he brought Eleanor of Aquitaine in, and then banished her from the kingdom. But his sons, he gave them property to straighten things out and much. But he leaned over to his oldest son and said, "I will get you. I will have my revenge on you." And he went into his castle where he was holed up and died. So he wasn't able to, but he was so, in so many battles, they actually have to tie him to a saddle in order to battle. But he still, even then, would go out and wield the sword and defeat people. I mean, these people were unbelievably brutal in those days. And life was brutal, And so we just don't realize how bad it was in their times. But what does it have to do with the Catholic Church? Well, first of all, the Mormons and then the Plantagenets supported the church. Matilda spent almost her entire wealth on monasteries, especially Benedictine and Cistercians, because they had a reputation of doing well with the people. And so the benefits of Matilda were enormous to the church. And then the whole issue of, the bishop still had the power because he had to do penance for causing the death of a bishop. And so the people still went to church and leaned on the church in need because that's the one place you can get it. And the kings didn't mess up that. The church was even their refuge to escape the wrath of kings, because they would go to the church and they were saved there. So that was a big story. I want to tell you, though, that the story of the white ship that I talked about, the drowning of Prince William, the only heir of Henry I, is written up in a book that's absolutely great. I've been reading it. It's called The White Ship, and it's written by Charles Spencer. Now, who is Charles Spencer? Does anybody know? That is the brother of Diana, Princess Diana of England. So, and he's written a lot of books, and he's a very good historian. And his main job is to maintain the family home. It's called Althorpe in England, and that's where Diana grew up. And so I thought that was very interesting. He has written another book called The Spencers, and it's the whole history of the Spencer family. It goes back way, was Diana a big enough aristocrat to marry the Prince of Wales? I would say so, because the Spencers go all the way back to the Stuarts. They're one of the oldest aristocracies and most powerful aristocracies in England. I didn't realize it until I started reading those books. She was a somebody, She wasn't just a girl, who worked in a bakery somewhere. She was big shot aristocrat. It went way, way back. And so, uh, and I think everybody likes Diana. So, and I'll never forget Charles' eulogy at Diana's wedding, in that he didn't blame anybody, but he said, Diana was killed in a car accident, and there's a lot of controversy around that. That he said, Diana, Diana means the goddess of hunting, and she was hunted a whole lot. That was very, very moving. He's a very articulate guy. Also, there was rumors that Prince Harry was not of the same lineage, and because he had red hair. And the thing is, there's a lot of red hair in the Spencer family, including Charles was a redhead when he was younger. He's gray-headed now, like some people we know. Okay, so I just wanted to tell you that. And then I want to talk about the Wilton diptych, because I need to correct a mistake I made in my first talk. You remember his name was, I can't remember, too darn many, Richard II. Remember the boy king who went out and talked to the crowd, and he was courageous to do that because it was awful. It was terrible battle and bloodshed all over the place. And this riot caused by the peasants, it's called the peasant riot, and they had already killed the king's officials, and actually decapitated one of them in the city streets. This has all happened around London, and he had the courage when he was only 15 years of age to take on the crowd, and he was the one who named England as the dowry of Mary, and so he's remembered fondly. But I forgot to say his history was not that good, because he was a real jerk. He rounded up all those presents and he had them all executed, and he went on to be one of the worst tyrants in the history of England. And if for a Plantagenet to be worse, you have to work really hard at it, because they were all very much terrible. And so I thought that was a good stuff. But the Wilton diptych depicts him, and I just want to, this is very famous. We have here the earthly reign and the heavenly reign with Mary and the baby Jesus, and they're all wearing the white stag of the royal family. And we have in here, down here is Richard II, John the Baptist, King Edward, and King Edmund, the boy king. And so, obviously, the church thought highly of him because they included him in this picture that it was used in churches, but he was actually a really awful person. He would not be included in the list of canonized saints. And so I think that's pretty good for today. I'm really full of it. I think you can probably notice that. I ate a couple candies, and I'm on a sugar high right now. Is that okay? And so I'm done. Goodbye.